Welcome to the Michigan Department of Education's Comprehensive History Instruction webinar series. Today, we are fortunate to have another strong presenter to discuss social studies practice and pedagogy. This session will focus on the why, the what, and the how of using the college, career, and civic life C3 framework. Grounded in the research of how people learn and operate in the world, the C3 framework and embedded inquiry arc provide the means to engage students in disciplinary thinking to deepen their understanding of the world and their place in it. This is the 9th topic in a series that the department is offering associated with a comprehensive teaching of U.S. and world history. As educators, we have the responsibility to teach the full breadth of history, including about difficult and challenging subjects such as race, racism, sexism, and xenophobia. As searing as some of our history is, we have a responsibility to teach it all to our children. This broad effort will help you as educators learn more about historical movements, events, and peoples that are part of a complex, diverse history of our country and world, and by extension, help you explore the same comprehensive history with your students. We are grateful for our presenter today, Dr. Linda Doornbos, Assistant Professor of Elementary Social Studies in the Teacher Development and Educational Services Program at Oakland University. With nearly 30 years of elementary and middle school social studies and language arts teaching experience, Dr. Doornbos is deeply committed to educating candidates to be responsive and responsible teachers and leaders in a diverse and complex world. Her research is grounded in supporting teachers as learners and builders of inclusive learning communities and investigating pedagogy that enhances the teaching and learning of social studies. Thanks to Dr. Doornbos for sharing her expertise and assisting in the growth of knowledge and understanding among our Michigan educators. Thanks to the education organizations whose partnership in an era of attempts to narrow curriculum and encourage subject and book banning is inspiring in and of itself. Thanks to the Teaching Comprehensive History webinar series team for its continued efforts in organizing these spaces for us to meet and learn. And finally, I'd like to thank you, our attendees, for your courage, your interest, and your conviction.
Thank you, Dr. Rice. And good afternoon. My name is Scott Koenig. I am a social studies consultant with the Michigan Department of Education. We're thrilled to have all of you in attendance as we continue the Comprehensive History webinar series. Before I turn over the presentation to today's presenter, I have some housekeeping announcements. Participants' video, audio, and chat features have been turned off. Questions for our presenter may be added using the Q&A feature. Questions will be addressed toward the end of this event as time permits. If time does not permit, questions will be addressed through email. We will provide links to resources using the chat feature throughout today's presentation. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on the Teaching Comprehensive History website. If you would like sketches for attending today, please be sure to sign in on the sketches link that will be provided on several occasions in the chat during this presentation. You can adjust your speaker view options anytime by selecting the View button at the top right of the Zoom window. At the conclusion of the webinar today, a survey will be emailed to participants. Please share your feedback as it helps to inform future webinars. Closed captioning and an American Sign Language interpreter, actually interpreters, have been provided. If closed captioning isn't automatically visible, select the Show a Subtitle option. Your interpreters for today are Ms. Candace and Ms. Laura. The TCH webinars are intended to lift the knowledge of educators so that in turn you may provide opportunities for your students to inquire, think critically, and explore history from multiple perspectives you may have not heard before. As you listen today, you are invited to explore these opportunities to take new learning, insights, and ideas to your communities. Now, without further ado, Dr. Doornbos is an assistant professor of elementary social studies at Oakland University, as mentioned by Dr. Rice. do works to support and develop practices where students critically engage with material that inspires them to wonder about the world and their place in it, consider multiple perspectives of power, privilege, and identity, and connect the past to present, and instills a desire to act and facilitate change. He has presented at numerous state and national conferences, joined with Oakland Intermediate Disciplinary consultants in conducting professional learning, and written book chapters, articles, and inquiry-based lessons that illuminate the experiences and resilience of marginalized peoples. Dr. Doornbos, it is an honor to be working and learning from you today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Scott. Share my screen. Hello, everybody, and thanks, Scott. I really appreciate the introduction. And I just want to thank the MDE for this invitation. I feel so honored to be a part of the series on comprehensive history. And I want to thank all you wonderful educators that are on the line or maybe watching this later that are so dedicated to teaching comprehensive history in your classroom. And the fact that you're here on June 7 tells a lot about how you are a learner in the world. I love it. So I look forward to spending the next hour or so together as we rethink and reimagine and just re-envision how to bring this rich comprehensive history into the K through 16 classrooms in our state using inquiry-based teaching and learning. I also want everyone to know the slide deck will be made available as one of the resources, and all this, everything's hyperlinked, but it'll also be sharing sources, as Scott said. And speaking of the slides, I do have to give a shout out to my amazing friends and colleagues at the Oakland Intermediate School District, Stacy Woodward, Christopher Lee, and Molly Gale. They have graciously included me in the work that they're doing to bring inquiry-based teaching and learning in the classroom, and by bringing teachers together in professional learning in what we call design labs. And a few of the slides on this presentation are from the work that we've done together. And just wanted to let you know that at one point you will need a piece of paper and something to write with. So if you don't have that, you might want to grab that. So here's where we're headed in our time together. The presenters in the Comprehensive History series have gifted us with marvelous content and resources. And now we're challenged to move forward in making intentional pedagogical choices to bring this comprehensive history into K through 16 classrooms. And yes, you did hear me say K through 16. I really believe strongly we need to tap into the curiosities of young learners to honor their forever questions of why, and to provide them with scaffolding needed to learn to live in a world so that they can be active, informed participants in our complex democracy and learn to respect differences. And then we can carry that on throughout the other grades. So together we can learn. We can learn with inquiry so that we're learning the content, and we can learn from inquiry as critical thinkers and problem solvers as we learn to navigate how to live rightly in the good, the bad, and the ugly. So in our time together, as Dr. Rice said, we'll be looking at the why, discerning our assumptions about how we have come to see and live in the world, being willing to disrupt those assumptions as new knowledge comes at us, and then developing with others ways to make the world more equitable and just. And then we're going to be spend time investigating the C3 framework, what it has to offer. It's embedded in our standards. It's an instructional tool that is used to bring life to the content, and it's integrated beautifully with literacy standards. And it's intentionally designed to enhance the rigor of social studies disciplines, to build critical thinking, problem solving, participatory skills to become engaged citizens. And then we're going to end with, well, how do we actually get started doing this? We'll look into some nuts and bolts of how to use inquiry design model of the C3 framework to design and implement. And hopefully that will just make you so excited about things to come that we can work on this in the future together. So let's start with why inquiry. When we think about inquiry as an instructional tool, I really believe strongly that it's important for us to position ourselves within the work. We need to know our individual stories, and then we need to know the larger story, and then consider how does our story fit into that larger story. So I just wanted to share just a little bit about my story, how I've come to see and live in the world, I grew up in a very whitewashed world. Everything was white. School was white. My neighborhood was white. My church was white. And I was taught implicitly and sometimes explicitly that white is right. And you're certainly not much if you're not Dutch. Yes, I'm 100% Dutch. But I really knew no different until my husband and I, and then at that time, our young daughter, we moved to Gallup, New Mexico. And over the next 9 years, we lived near the Navajo reservation. And I taught in a former missionary boarding school. And in my classroom, students that were Navajo, Zuni, Hopi, Hispanic, African-American, and Anglo. And wow, stepping out of my white world, that radically changed how I saw the world, how I experienced US history, and how I saw my role in being part of creating a better world for all people. Now, these experiences and many others, past and present, are part of my lifelong journey of learning about differences, learning more each and every day, and how I navigate the world. A few other highlights here in the picture. This is long ago when my children were young, but I've learned so much. I have a special needs son who has physical and cognitive issues. And so I've learned a lot about how to navigate that world and learned how to find joy in simple things. On the other end of the spectrum, I have a very gifted intellectual daughter who, when she was young, drove me crazy with her why questions. So I've learned a lot from her. I've learned in my other teaching experiences besides New Mexico, I taught it in Grand Rapids at an urban setting. And then I also taught in a very a parochial white suburban. And I've learned a lot about that. Now that I've been at OU, got my PhD at Michigan State in 2018. I will be entering my 6th year at Oakland University. And now I try to, with my pre-service students, to broaden their view of history, to help them see their story and the larger story. And just real quickly, 3 books that we are investigating. In one of the classes, the students look at Takaki, A Different Mirror, where 9 different marginalized groups or minority groups tell their story of the history through their voices. We hear a history of the United States. Then in the next course they take, we read Indigenous people's history of the United States for young people and listen to the voices and experiences of Indigenous people. And then they end with their 3rd class of social studies. We look at stories that aren't often told about queer history and the way that people have significantly contributed to who we are as a nation. So that's just a little bit about my story. So we need to continually learn about these and reflect on our individual stories, connect to the larger story. So now I want to turn a little bit to that larger story. We're going to watch a 2-minute video. And as we watch it, I want you to focus on the following questions. What does it mean to be an American? And whose story should be included in the history of our country? How do individual stories connect to the larger story? And what's our role in creating that more just and equitable society? Now, just a little caveat before I start the video. I want you to know that in no way am I promoting Joe Biden and his administration. So I'm asking you just to ignore that a picture of him will show up in the first opening scenes. And there'll be a message about his election. This was taken from the 2020 election. But instead, focus on the people you see, the things you see them doing, the places that are in this video, and the lens through which you're seeing them. And think about the significance of the frames that you're going to see and what it means to be a country that honors and respects differences.
Oh, beautiful, far spacious skies, far amber waves of grain, far purple mountain majesties. But now wait a minute, I'm talking about America, sweet America. You know, God done shed his grace on thee. He crowned thy good. Yes, he did. Heavy brotherhood from sea to shining sea. You know, I wish I had somebody to help me sing this.
Now, if we had time, we could spend the next 20 minutes talking about that, but we don't. So with the video in mind and what you just saw and took in, I want you to look at this image and how does this image capture the message in the video? So I'll just give you a few seconds to see if you can catch on to what this image is showing us. And if you saw it, yes, you're right. This is our story, the story of the United States. It is the preamble. So if you notice, it's "We the people." I won't go through all that, but on license plates, I love it. But it's "We the people," and we're trying to establish a more perfect union. So as we the people, what does it mean to be American? Who gets to decide that? How has we, who the people are, changed over time? Who has played a significant role in shaping our nation? Who decide, and how does defining who the people matter? Especially as we start thinking about ordaining and establishing that more perfect union. Who has played a significant role in the good and the bad and the ugly parts of our story? What does it mean to create a more perfect union? And how does who is asking the questions and who is defining that more perfect union matter for how we live and act in the world? The Comprehensive History series has been a wonderful source for learning about the larger story of the United States. These wonderful presenters provided powerful ways for us to learn the stories of the people that have shaped this country. They have left us with thought-provoking ways to think about what history should be taught and why. They've shared their expertise and they've opened their hearts and minds to the larger story, the good, the bad, and the ugly parts of it. And each of us has challenged us to bring this information to the classroom, giving us wonderful primary and secondary sources, people, events that have helped us to make sense of who we are individually, but also who we are as a nation. And if you haven't listened to all those, go back. I'm going to listen to them again. They are amazing. So how can we make this history come alive in the classroom? How can we make it so that students see that history is not just about a bunch of dead people who did some things? Rather, it's about studying the past to better understand the present and then see our role in working together to imagine and work towards a better future. However, as we've heard from them, it's complicated. Perspective matters. And then, like I said before, how we define who we the people are, and how we define what it means to establish and ordain a more perfect union matters. So as we, the people, seek to create a more perfect union, let's dive in. So this is where you need that a pencil and paper, or you could even do this on your phone if you needed to. What I would ask you to do right now is with that piece of paper, you're gonna have 5 lists. African American, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Latinx, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Asian American, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and Native Americans, disabled Americans, and LGBTQ. So I'll give you a second to write on your paper those lists. And what you're going to do, I'm giving you about 30 seconds to a minute. We're not going to take a long time, and you probably won't finish, and that's okay. I want you to name 5 notable people, each of those categories, and they can be living or dead. And so why don't you do that now for about a minute? Okay, for sake of time, I am going to stop you there. That's okay if you didn't get done, or you can keep writing while we move on. What I want to do is have you listen to Kelly Carter Jackson. I took this activity from her. We did it in one of our professional design labs, and she explains the activity and why she does it in such a beautiful way that I think it's better to hear it from her than me. So let's listen to this.
There's a game that I like to play on the first day of my class. It's called Name 5, and I have students take out a sheet of paper, and they have like 30 seconds to a minute, and they have to name 5 people. It could be living or dead. They just have to be notable. They have to name 5 African Americans. Then they have to name 5 Latinx Americans, and 5 Asian Americans, and 5 Native Americans, and 5 disabled Americans, and 5 LGBTQ Americans. And I do that because, one, I want them to be able to think about Americans that have contributed something to this country. But 2, I also want them to realize how difficult it is to play that game. I have a lot of students who are very, very bright, very exceptional. And when they play the game, they realize they're struggling to name 5, that they can't name 3, that sometimes they come up with 2, or, you know, when they're thinking about Native Americans, they can only name Native Americans that are dead, not contemporary Native Americans. Or when they think of Asian Americans or Latin Americans, it's only singers and actresses and things of that nature. And when I pose them the question, you know, is it because these groups have not contributed anything to American society? Well, we know that's not true. A lot of it is the way that we've been taught. A lot of it is how the world has been presented to us. And I think we have been presented history through a very white male-centric lens. And because of that, a lot of people have gotten left out of this narrative. So when I teach my classes, I play this game not to make them feel bad about themselves, but to really get them to see how the world has been presented to them, and to search out voices that have been silenced, and to seek out these people that have contributed so much to the greatness that is the United States of America. So I spend a lot of time studying the marginalized and taking them from the margins and pushing them at the center.
So once again, we hear that our individual stories, but what is that larger stories that she so beautifully talked to? So why inquiry then? To teach comprehensive history in our classrooms, so that we recognize how history has been presented to us, search out voices, and then help shape the greatness of America. So inquiry helps us discern those things. It helps us gain perspective on the world. It goes beyond the meaningless memorization to rigorous and relevant learning. And once again, just helps us act to make the world more just and equitable. And research-based, it increases the rigor and cognitive load for students. It increases their engagement and their interest when they are excited about what we ask them to do and they see the relevance. It helps them to take risks intellectually. It helps them learn those skills that are so necessary to communicate clearly, the ability to work with other people, and to be able to manage time effectively. It helps scaffold support for student autonomy, so that we're handing over that students become responsible for the learning, that they learn to do collaborative work, that they're really involved in authentic learning that they can carry into all of life, and develop that love for learning, that once we leave school, it's just the beginning and not the end, and that we can tackle real life complex problems that matter. And it helps build their learner confidence. And if we have to be truthful, our nation's report card that just came out is not super exciting. It's very disturbing, actually, how our students are showing a disturbingly declining history scores, along with the recent RAND report that just came out for so specific to social studies, is just not good. And if you've seen this infographic before, is that social studies since the No Child Left Behind has been very marginalized. And we know that standardized tests typically are going to promote factual recall and not often considered applications. And that when students do experience inquiry-based instruction, they can flourish. And we do want you to stay tuned. We're at an exciting point in our Michigan history here. because we have a newly developed advisory group of teacher educators, ISD consultants, representatives from organizations such as iCivics Michigan. We have state consultants, and our goal is going to promote the increase in quantity and quality of social studies in Michigan. We've just begun. We sent out a survey that 1,000 teachers and administrators participated in, and we're eager in the midst of analyzing that data and then strategically planning next steps. And we couldn't be more excited about what those next steps are going to be. If we want informed, active civic engagement to promote the common good, we need to invite all students, K through 16, into being we the people and creating learning opportunities for all of us to be part of creating a more perfect union where people thrive, not just merely survive. So let's now go into that. The next part of the presentation is, what is inquiry? And we want to spend a few minutes investigating the C3 framework, but I thought it would be very beneficial and helpful for me to know your level of familiarity with the C3 framework. So Scott, if you could put up our first poll, and if you would just humor us by answering that, and we could, we can see where everybody is at. That's helpful for me. Fun to see it live happening. And this is great. It shows us that, you know, we have work to do together, and it's exciting work and it's fun work. And so, and I don't know, Scott, do I empty out of the poll or do you? I guess I can.
I have it. Yeah, I have it for you.
Okay.
Should be sharing right now. Are you?
Yeah, it's sharing, but if I want, should I stop sharing if I want?
I got it. I got you here.
All right, thank you. So thank you for doing that. That helps me as I go through what I'm going to say here. And so we want to think about the scholarly rationale for the C3. What the C3 does is it provides this common language and curricular approach to inquiry. It features these 4 distinct but interrelated dimensions, so of questions, engaging in disciplinary literacy, evaluating sources and using evidence, and acting in ways to promote the common good. So those are the 4 dimensions of the C3 framework. And let's see, lost my place. Our democratic republic will not be sustained unless students are aware of the changing cultural and physical environments. And so we want to engage them in this inquiry arc and support them in the work of what these dimensions have to offer. So we want students to know about the past, connect it to the present. We want them to be able to read and write and think deeply. We want them to act in ways that promote the common good. The life, the liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it comes with responsibilities, not just about me and mine. It's about others, and it's about our world and about our environment. And although there are differing opinions on those objectives and how to reach them, the goal of knowledgeable, thinking, informed, active citizens, I believe, is universal. So the C3 framework is centered on this inquiry arc, okay? That's the set of the interlocking and mutually supporting dimensions of the framework of the ways that students can learn social studies. And so we want to think about inquiry-based teaching and learning that furnishes students' mind with the subject matter of history and the social sciences and empowers them to reason with evidence. So they're learning how to do sourcing, contextualizing, corroboration, and questioning. This liberates them to think outside the box of their upbringing and the status quo. It's like a blade that can cut through the crust of conventional wisdom, leading them into thinking about things in the unknown. And to me, that's the social justice rationale, that all of our students should have access to this process so that they learn that questions about life are crucial. It's not about answers, it's about questions and seeking out ways to find answers. We want to tap into their natural curiosities. We don't want to kill that curiosity. We want to nurture it. We want them to see that they're active in this process. They're not just these passive empty vessels with the teacher as the talking head, like I'm doing right now, pouring knowledge into them. We want to go beyond that didactic unidirectional process of learning. We want to help them be problem solvers and teach them the strategies for that. And we want them to see that we want to investigate the real world because we want to learn how to better navigate it. This is another way to illustrate the C3 framework. We see that the elements of inquiry support and scaffold students' engagement so that they're invited into the inquiry through questions, and that they're structured through tasks and sources to keep them moving throughout where the content and skills, and then enabled with sources. And the more we know about the content, which the previous webinars really have laid out well for us, the better we will be at crafting rigorous and relevant inquiries. So now let's turn our attention in the C3 framework to what's called the Inquiry Design Model, or IDM. Now, the IDM follows the inquiry arc. It's a template that we're going to look at in a minute for designing the inquiries using the set of those 4 interlocking dimensions of the C3 framework. And at this point, I've said a lot of words. I'm the talking head. So you may be asking, what is the IDM and what does this have to do with teaching comprehensive history? So let's look at the IDM. The Inquiry Design Model is a template. The IDM is the template, and there's links to the templates here too. Unique to the IDM is the blueprint. It's a one-page, it was specifically designed to be a one-page representation of the main elements: questions, tasks, and sources that define an inquiry: questions, tasks, sources. And the goal is to fit it all on one page so that it's not overly prescriptive. It can be adapted and changed and morphed depending on context and students and curriculum. And there are different templates. This happens to be one that has 4 different supporting questions with the compelling question. There's also templates with 3. And there's also one if you just want to do a 1 or 2 day inquiry, you could use a focused inquiry. This could be even a unit when you have this. It depends on how in depth you go with the sources. But it's meant to be a visual snapshot that a teacher could quickly look at and see all the elements and take parts or use it all or tweak it to make it their own. There's a lot of moving parts in here, as we'll see when we get to the how. It's a distinctive approach to creating inquiry and instructional materials that honors teachers' expertise. That's what I love about it. Teachers are the experts here. And as an avoiding overprescription, it does focus on those main elements, as we will see as we get further. So just a quick overview. Those compelling questions help frame what we're going to study. Staging the question is, you'll see in a minute, how we invite students into that inquiry. The supporting questions are where the content comes in and the skills. For the performative tasks are showing us emergent understandings as the students are working through it. The featured sources provide those rich content with different arguments so that students can build arguments from different perspectives. The summative task is where they answer the question and they make a claim and back it up with evidence from the sources. Extension activities, ways to use what they have discovered. And ultimately, we want them to be able to take action. How are they going to use this for civic engagement? That could be in the classroom, but it could be at school, but it could also be in the larger community. Now, in order for this to happen, we want to zoom out just for a minute and take a broader look. It takes an instructional shift for this to happen in the classroom if we're going to move towards inquiry-based. And so inquiry is a part of an equitable classroom. It's not something that we're going to pull off the shelf and do as a special project for the day, but rather over time, we want this to become a way of being in the classroom, a way of approaching teaching and learning, preparing students for the real world, the messy and the complex, but the amazing and the beautiful world we live in. So it gives students the space to think, to question, to grapple with evidence. And we set up a classroom that's more equitable than one in which we, the talking heads, disperse knowledge so they can regurgitate it back to us. And that's not saying we're never going to use the textbook. It doesn't say that. It's that if we're going to use the textbook, we can supplement with other sources to give other perspectives. And Instead of it, you can see that this is very focused on student-centered learning. And it really connects, I think the beauty of it, it connects them to relevant and meaningful learning. And I think it helps us think about this, that it shifts the roles too. So if we think about the teacher, we are become the facilitators. We're the environment creators. We're developing that scaffolding. We're shifting the responsibility of students being responsible for their own learning, and for them willing to accept teachers have to be willing to step into the messiness. I always say to my pre-service teachers, you're not going to have a Pinterest perfect lesson. It's going to be messy. And then I say, has life been messy for you? And you get a lot of nods, yes. Well, learning, I think, needs to be messy then too. We need to step into real life. Students realize they have to take the responsibility as learners. It's given to them. They're active sense makers. They're learning to collaborate with each other as they construct new knowledge. And the janitor on Abbott Elementary is one of my favorite because he helps us see things differently. He exposes us to different perspectives, that the content can be found in many different places, and that there's skills. We need to be digitally literate. We need to be able to think through the disciplines. And again, never forgetting that the purpose is not to take a test and go to the right college and get, a job that makes a lot of money, although those things can be important. But more importantly, are we acting in the world to make it a better place for more than just me and mine, but for the common good? And so if we're truly going to approach teaching and learning through inquiry lens, it needs to be who we are from the inside out, not dusting it off the shelf to use every once in a while, learning about our story, learning the bigger story, and then constantly discerning our assumptions about how we're seeing and living in the world, being willing to disrupt those when new evidence is provided for us, and then continually working with others. Our world is so individualistic, and I think we need to be in this together if we're going to shape the world to be more just and equitable. And Crowley and King have just written a phenomenal article. I hope you can take time to read that. It's very accessible to teachers. And they wrote a seminal piece about how to make inquiry critical in this way. So we can frame the questions, the compelling questions, so that it could critique systems of power and oppression. We can expose students to sources that include the perspectives of the marginalized and oppressed groups. And I love the ones that our webinar series presenters have given to us, and I'll show you where there's lots more. And then developing tasks and taking informed action that push our students to see that they are active in our democracy, that they can help take tangible steps towards alleviating injustice. And then Conrad and Gallagher just put out an article that we used in our last design lab that's just phenomenal because it focuses really on honing that compelling question that is so important to an inquiry. So if you get a chance, a look at that too. It's step by step. And they help us realize too that it's messy work and complex work, but it's necessary work. And it's crucial to teaching comprehensive history in our classrooms. So that was a lot of words once again. So we're going to take a few minutes to walk through an example so you can see a template and how it's created and the inquiry that came out of it. And I want to show you this resource. It's from the Teacher Education Research Collaborative Inquiries, which was a group that came together, group of teacher educators. And I was privileged enough to be on this group where for 1.5 to 2 years, we came together and said, we want to write inquiries focusing on Asian American history. And it was through a grant through the Library of Congress. But we knew that to begin, we had to learn our own content knowledge. Most of us on the call, teacher educators, PhDs, we did not know Asian American history because we were not taught it. So we listened to the voices and experiences of Asian Americans, their stories, they presented, they told us some of the history. We read books, we discussed the books, and then we found kind of our people. And so I got to work with 2 other people, and we started small. We each just wrote an inquiry, and I want to show you where these are. They're on the NCS website, and you do not have to be a member to access. They're free. And there are inquiries, Asian American history for grades 3 through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12. And so right now what I'd like to do is show you one of the examples. a quick walkthrough, and this was one of the 9 through 12, to show you the different parts of how the dimensions show up on the template. And I'll spend time later specifically going into how to do this. But here is the one-page template that this group wrote with their compelling question of why should we question the claims that Angel Island was the Ellis Island of the West. Now, they didn't quite make their whole inquiry on one page because they had so many sources, but it's close. And so you begin with the end in mind. It's backwards design that many of us are used to. And so you have content standards. These were actually written, these are standards from the C3 framework, but you can easily put in Michigan standards. And then you jump to the end of the template because you want to think about, where do we want students to end up? How do we want them to answer this? And what might we want them to do with it? And so you write the standards, and then you write where the end of the journey, where do you want them to be? And then staging the question, even though it's on the top of the template, which you'll see this is not a linear process to do it all. You usually write that last, but that's a short activity where you are inviting students into the inquiry. And so I have a slide where you can see this a little closer up. This group decided that they were going to use an image, a see, think, wonder. And if you clicked on here, it explains how to do a visual thinking strategy if you're not familiar. And so as you stage a question, you want to ignite their curiosity by, it could be a photo, it could be a political cartoon, it could be a personal story, it could be a short video. You could use the question formation techniques. I'm not going to spend time on that, but I did put it into the slides. That's a phenomenal way to get older kids started. But what you want to do then is you can tap into their prior knowledge and then say, this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be looking at this question. Then what happens here is the supporting questions. We want to support students in answering that compelling question. So here, this is a 4 supporting question template. And this is where the heart of the content comes in. Each supporting question, as we move across horizontal, we call this horizontal alignment, it should increase in complexity. So you might start with just factual, what is Angel Island and what purpose did it serve? And students will use, this is where the vertical alignment comes in. They'll take the featured sources, they will investigate them, show us what they're finding on the performance task. So here they're going to create a visual display showing understanding of Angel Island. Then they're going to increase in complexity as it goes across. So we're thinking about why were the detainment conditions different between them? And the closer they get to here, the closer they are to be able to answer the compelling question. And so here's a list of many resources. You could use all of these. You could use some of these. This is where it's great because it's not prescriptive and you get to see what works best for you. They put in maps, they put in images, they put in articles. There's many different ways to do this. And so these are the sources, vertical alignment here, that this is supporting question 1, supporting question 2. And then you are driven by these questions, scaffolded by task and sources. Now the students are ready to answer the question. And so the summative task is where you're going to have each individual answer the question by making a claim and backing it up with evidence from the sources that you saw. You're going to choose an activity that fits your students to do this, allow for choices. I think it's a great place to implement those wonderful universal design for learning principles. And the extension activity would just be allow them to learn or bring it to a different audience. It can enable them to go across disciplines, provide opportunities to practice communicating their ideas with another audience, or express their argument in different modalities. And then the informed action could take place in the classroom. It could be creative and expressive, discussion-oriented, or project-based. And so what I want to make sure this perspective here, we just looked at an individual inquiry using the IDM template of Angel Island. And so that was done using that template that helps us design. And that is incorporating the 4 dimensions of the C3 framework. You saw the questions, you saw the disciplinary thinking in the resources and the performed a task, you saw them taking action and being able to support their claims with evidence. And that's all part of this huge inquiry process. Inquiry is not a new thing. It's just that the C3 framework is this common language we're using, and the IDM is the instructional tool that we're using. And once again, it needs to become a part of the way that we just are. It's not just an activity, it's a way of thinking and being, connecting that theory and practice. And there's a lot of tools to help us with this doing. So if you don't have to, reinvent the wheel. So at this point, I want to stop and do another poll. So Scott, if you're ready for that one, I want you to take a look at these fun images and what best represents how you are feeling right now about using inquiry-based teaching and learning to engage students, either A, B, C, D, or E. Well, we got a few people getting sore jaws from chomping on that gum. Some people seeing it as a virtual reality. I love watching polls happen. We'll wait another 30 seconds or so for others to. Okay, just, time to reflect on where we're feeling. So as we move on then, let's go to let's get into the nuts and bolts. How do we actually do this work? So before we dive into plan inquiries, just think in your own head, after taking that poll, thinking about what do you think you need to do to understand, know, and be able to do as we enter this work? And do you have any questions? And make sure that you're putting those questions in the question and answer box. It will really help us as we move into that advocacy work, and so that we can better support teachers wanting to do this work. And I'm not going to show this video right now, but if we have time, it's a wonderful one. It really fits in with the why. But this is, if you've ever watched the YouTube video of what kind of Korean are you, that little video really sums up what we've been talking about, is how we assume things, how those assumptions can be disrupted, and how we need to move forward. But I think at this point, I would like to move on to walking step by step through these main elements. If you leave with nothing else, feel good about knowing that inquiries are made up of the elements of questions, compelling and supporting, the tasks that are formative and summative, and the sources that are used to spark interest, build disciplinary knowledge, and help students construct an argument. It's questions, tasks, and sources. And what we're going to do for the next few minutes now is just take one of those at a time and try to unpack it a little bit as much as we can in this short amount of time. So the role of questions and the role of tasks and the role of sources, and this beautiful synergy between them. So let's start with questions. Take a moment to just look at this compelling question and supporting question and note the difference. And as you can see, that compelling question is very open-ended and debatable. It could depend on who's asking the question. It could depend on when you're asking that question and the perspective of the person. But then the supporting question that is needed to help students answer that compelling question in a evidence-based way, notice that's very straightforward, and you can look that up and there's a definite answer. Whereas the compelling question, there's no one set answer to that. And what I did here to help us think about questions a little bit more is I went into one of the books that the C3 authors have written. They've written some very accessible books, but I use this with my pre-service teachers and it seems to be helpful. It's thinking about the traits of a compelling question. They need to be age appropriate for sure. They need to be intriguing. We want to go beyond just yes or no. You can do that, but you have to be careful about that. We want to show students that not everything has a right answer. This can be very frustrating at first. They just tell me what I need to know and tell me what the answer is. Well, sometimes there aren't easy answers or one right answer. We want to provoke that curiosity, and it has to have staying power throughout the inquiry. And it also helps, I think, to know there's many different kinds of inquiry. And I think if you can narrow down what you're doing, are you doing a broad brush inquiry? And so that will make a difference on what kind of compelling question you want to ask. For example, what is truth? Or what is justice? Or you could be more narrow in your focus, like a single case study. Should Puerto Rico be a state? Maybe with younger students, you want to do a comparative. What's better, a map or a globe? Maybe you want to, you're cute with word plays. Was the New Deal a new deal? Or is free trade worth the price? And maybe you're good with irony. Is greed good? Can peace lead to war? And then some criteria for crafting those compelling questions. We've talked a little bit about that already. And then things to avoid. You may try to be super cute that you leave out the content in the question. You want to draw students into content. For example, you could say, where did you get that t-shirt? But the alternative might be if the t-shirt had Rosie the Riveter on it, what happened to Rosie? That draws them into specific content. Or we want to avoid ones that are so content heavy that students might want to run for the door before we start. So an example, does the GDP tell the whole story of a country's economic health? Or I think we might grab their attention better if we say, does GDP tell the right story? And so that is a helpful page for you, just some helpful hints there. And so the compelling question is really important. It really drives the entire inquiry. But the supporting questions are going to support students as they try to answer that. They're usually not debatable. They're discrete, probably fact-based answers. Their responses are based on the analysis of sources. So it really relies on the sources to answer those. And it helps sustain and scaffold the inquiry. And so if we think about, here's another example. If you have never looked at the Native Knowledge 360, I highly recommend it. They have beautiful lessons written using the IDM. They have great resources. You can use them as is, you can change them, you can go in and just use the sources. And so questions you want to ask yourself, is the compelling question compelling? Is the treaty intended to be forever? And then notice as the horizontal alignment. What happens as you move from supporting question 1 to what values shape treaty making, to did parties honor their treaties? And then how do the supporting questions lead students into making that argument, right? And do questions help students attend to the issues of justice and equity? So that thinking about the questions is super important because that's what's going to lead students through this and allow them to problem solve and analyze and evaluate. So then we move on to the all-important task. Now the tasks are going to be what it supports, right? What the students are going to do to show you how they're understanding. They're going to, once we said, horizontal alignment. The first task is the least complicated. The last task should be close to being able to answer that compelling question. And all those tasks work together to build students through content knowledge and skills. This is where those beautiful literacy skills come in, where they're reading and evaluating sources. They're making claims. They're making counterclaims. They're learning to think chronologically and causation and constructing arguments. And they will be using, if you go the vertical alignment, right, here's supporting question 1, they'll be investigating the sources that we'll get at in a minute. And then the task needs to match the sources. Maybe it's a graphic organizer. Let's see them, go to the next page here. Shows you once again the same IDM. And here's the task. So we have our performative task. What do you notice about the progression of the task? So on this first one, whoop, I just went into that. Excuse me a second. So they're making inferences about the values and beliefs. Here they're making inferences about possible intentions. Here they're crafting evidence-based claims. So they're getting pretty close to being able to answer this. And then the summative task is where each individual. And what I have done here is just linked, I think what's really helpful, and when you're designing those performative tasks, whether it's a graphic organizer or a T-chart or visual representations, is to use the Bloom's taxonomy wheel. I think the performance verbs really help us think about starting with the verb. I always tell my preceptors, start with the verb for your task, because so we know what they're doing. Are they participating in something? Are they drawing something? Are they illustrating? Are they building? And then if you click on the wheel, I think it just gives you great ways to think about things that they can do for performative tasks. You don't want it to be super long. These are just ways for them to record what they're finding in the sources, and for you to take a quick glance at how they're understanding it, and if you need to intervene with some more support. I think that's highly important in evaluating those tasks. And then, of course, the summative tasks and the where they individually are answering that question. But notice we have vertical alignment then, where we're going this way, but we're also going this way with horizontal alignment. And I wish we had lots more time to practice and talk, but and then taking informed action, of course, is civic engagement. And we don't want to skip that piece. Maybe it's just going to be something they're going to do in the classroom. But if we can find time, how important it is to be civically engaged in our schools and in our the larger communities. So now we're going to look at those sources. In our work with teachers, this, besides the factor that always comes up, how do we make time to do this, is how and where to find reliable sources that are accessible to students, are the questions that come up most frequently. So let's look at sources. Now, the role of sources is really important. We want to spark curiosity to sustain inquiry and keep them engaged, but we also want to challenge them at the same time, right? We want to build that disciplinary knowledge. How do you think like a historian? How do you think like a geographer? How do you think like an economist or a political scientist? And then how do you take what you've learned from those sources so that when you are constructing your answer, your argument of the compelling question, you can back it up with evidence and you can anticipate those counter claims that people are going to make and be able to address that and then have a good civil conversation about that. And the authors of the C3 framework have offered us great supports. They have written 2 books that are very accessible. I highly recommend both of these. They'll be on a list later. Much of what I'm saying is also in there, and they give examples that are very helpful. Now, we want to make sure that we have a good mixture balance of primary and secondary. And we want that no source we have to think about as inherently primary or secondary. Whether a source is primary or secondary depends on the question you're pursuing. For example, a newspaper or editorial opinion piece, that could actually both be a primary and secondary. You might be exploring how an event affected people at a certain time. So this then would be considered a primary source. And I think Heather Nice said it well when she says we need to reconsider our primary sources as the gold standard mindset. We can't only use primary sources. Just look at or talk to Indigenous people, because they really say that, you know, in the original primary sources, there just aren't any written from their perspective. And so we also need to do secondary sources and then actually listen to the voices and experiences of the actual people. Here are a list of several different things. We want to shake it up so that we address different learner needs and that they can see different ways. When I did one project, we started with obituaries, and it's amazing what kinds of questions come from obituaries, or taking a walk through a cemetery and being able to ask questions about what you see. There's crafts, there's letters, there's cartoons, just many, many of them. What's important though is that we have a diversity. that in both the type that we want to offer our students, and this is where we have to have that relationship with our students to know, but we also want to make sure that we're offering different points of view. And that's not always easy to do and locate. So as we think about these equitable teaching practices and bringing the sources, we have to select carefully. We want to choose sources that are going to build their curiosity, at the same time bringing that content knowledge and that help them construct that argument. We want to attend to diversity. We want to make sure that the content is being represented well. And then we can make sure that we're utilizing archives and libraries and collections. But not all of those sources are easily accessible, especially to elementary students. So we need to learn how to adapt them. We have to do that carefully. And we always say that if you've adapted a source, it's good to show students the original so they can see. And we have to that's why it's important that we know who we are, and the decisions we're making can make a difference on the source, correct? How can we best scaffold so that they can access it? And then how do we make sure that those adaptations we've made are very visible? And I'll show you an example in a minute. And then we need to scaffold it and situate it. Analyzing sources in an inquiry requires the complex literacy work, and it requires us putting in those scaffolds that are uniquely fit for our context and our students and what the inquiry is. And we have to remember that sources are often just accounts of what happens in the past. We have to talk about how history has been recorded. They might not always be just straight out facts. And they have to be age appropriate, right? And so we want to contextualize the test, establish purpose. We want to make adaptations if needed. We maybe have to rewrite difficult sections. We have to create a header. We have to create excerpts. We can provide vocabulary support. And if we clicked on this is just a site for you to go out to that gives a lot of good examples on how to provide that vocabulary support, especially if you can't enter the content if you don't have the right vocabulary. And then visual supports are always helpful. Photos and diagrams and maps, so it's not always written text. We need to provide practice. They improve by reading more text, not less. And so maybe we want to model for them and do a think aloud. And so there's also a link to how to do a think aloud. Walk through the process, show the students how you are analyzing that source and how you're using the performative task to record what your findings. Provide read alouds. Maybe there's many apps now that will read for students. And we can use graphic organizers, close reading strategies, and these Zoom in activities. And these are all lovely sites for you to visit. You'll have access to the slides that you can click on those. Those are intentional things that we could do. So here's an example. And this was done by my wonderful friends at the ISD. And so they took this document that was way too difficult to access and they contextualize it. And so they put some notes on it here. They made scaffolding visible. Here's some vocabulary they really felt that they needed to be able to, that they have to know to be able to enter it. And then instead of the entire thing, they took out excerpts and made it very doable. And so students can do this individually or do it with a group. Now, different ways that we can find these. One of the sites that is just marvelous, that is a go-to, is c3teachers.org. This is where you're going to find all those wonderful templates, the IDM. And they also have a template filled in with all of the notes. So I can click on that in a minute. I think we have time. So I think this is beautiful. Here are the templates that you can download. Let's see. Right here. Here are the templates. And then this is the IDM at a glance. It will tell you all the different things, the working parts that I was showing you. And so 3-question, 4-question, and the focused. In my pre-surface work, I do a lot with focus inquiry. It's very doable. And we take the part of the standards that's on public issues, because I find that it's easy to find sources for people who are doing this for the first time. And also here, you can look at inquiries. There are just marvelous inquiries here that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can look at what other people have done. And you can search on here. I highly recommend that you don't select grade level because these are from all different states and around the world, and they might not align with Michigan state standards. So it's better off just to select the topic or just enter a keyword. But you can see that there's just many of these. I'll show you the hubs. These are all the different groups that have entered inquiries in here. New York ones are exceptionally well. They had a huge grant, and so those have been vetted. And there's many in here and just beautifully written. They have the template, they have the IBM, and then underneath they have suggestions for how to teach it. But once again, remember, it's up to you because the teachers are the experts here. Then there's a lot of beautiful places to go for curated sets. You can go to the Library of Congress, and they do a lot of workshops showing you how to navigate their site. It's just a beautiful set of primary source places to look. They also, and the National Archives, the same Docs Teach. And each one of those, they give you these marvelous ways that you can use for a performative task if you wanted to, like how to analyze a map. We'll go into that. And they will show you not only how to do the map for early elementary or those learning English, or worksheets that help with secondary. So those are very helpful too. So at the end, the Henry Ford, they just have wonderful sets of sources too. So those are places to go for sources. Then what I've listed here is just some of my favorites, but I'll show you where I've compiled many more. I want to highlight a couple of these. I just showed you Native Knowledge is marvelously written, amazing sources created by Indigenous people. This right here, the Confederation of Michigan, they have built a beautiful supplement to the state standards. If you have not checked that out, I highly recommend that. And then Time Shift America, you may not be familiar with. They have created specific videos to Michigan that align with the standards. And they take moments in time, for example, a photo, and they blend it with other archival photographs. And then they present a video that is a journey through time. It's marvelous. And this is a new site that is very interesting. I'm just beginning to explore that, but it's free. And what they've really focused on trying to find many multimodal accessible sources for students. And then there's, of course, the C3 teachers I just showed you, Smithsonian, and many other places. Another couple of ones that I want to highlight. I don't know if you're familiar with KQED Above the Noise, but this is a marvelous place. I show this to my pre-service teachers. We do a few of these. They're not specifically aligned to the C3 framework, but they follow all of the same elements of questions, tasks, and sources. And they're about 12 to 15 minutes long. They would be more appropriate for middle school or high school. But they show marvelous sources in the video, a very entertaining, not entertaining, but very informative way. And there are multiple, there are many, and you can look at these for how to design a compelling question. Some of my students look through here, coping with stress in school and life. How should schools educate teens about drugs? And they're marvelous. And each one of them has an outline for teachers on how to teach it too. So this is just a marvelous source that you might want to check out, especially if you're new to designing inquiries. Another one, the Library of Congress, shout out to them. The Library of Michigan, there's a webinar that you've got to see in this comprehensive history series. Marvelous ways that they have shown us how to use the Library of Michigan and what is actually there. As I've said before, if you haven't listened to all of them, go back. The teaching comprehensive history webinars are amazing. PBS puts out wonderful things. And then what I've done in the last few years, my students say, you always keep telling us all of these wonderful sites, but where are we going to keep track of these? How do we sort these out. And so I have compiled a list that is made available to you. If you don't make a copy, it will continue to be updated. I update this as soon as I find something, I put it on it. And this is pages and pages and pages long. It might be overload, but I have history, Indigenous people's history, Michigan history, ideas for Thanksgiving. These aren't necessarily inquiries, but these are places to look for sources. I have, then it goes on to geography, economics, civics. I have children's literature sites. I have where you could go for current events and newspapers from across the world. So it goes on and on and on. Technology sites. So it's a marvelous resource that I think you'll absolutely love. And that if you wanted to make a copy, you could start adding your own to that too. So that will for sure be available to you. I don't know if you're familiar with Newsela. There is a free version. I love Newsela because it follows current events and you can ask it to take the article and put it in a lexicon for higher or reading level or different reading levels there. Geo inquiries are marvelous too. A few more sources if you're doing world history. The OER project is phenomenal. World History for Us All. And I've only barely touched on those, but they're marvelous. And then what I thought I'd do is for each of you is examples of inquiry. I took the teaching comprehensive, some of the topics that have been presented, and I found inquiries that are within those categories and put one for the elementary level, and then a second one for the high school level. So for example, Asian American, if you would click on here, this is the one that I actually wrote for the Turk project. And so here is the one-page template and then a description of the inquiry. And then there's a high school example. And I also took this from that Turk website. And I went through Indigenous people. This was actually written by one of my students. I love what she did with that, so I included that. And then the Holocaust, we don't, we have to be careful with age appropriateness for early elementary. So I found a marvelous one where you can talk about how do we combat anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and then how do Jewish, each one of these is a full-fledged inquiry that you can look at and take note of. This is another one that I wrote with a student of mine. It takes place in Marshall, Michigan. It's lovely, about pre-Civil War, but a marvelous story of enslaved people that go from Virginia and land up in Marshall, Michigan, escape to Detroit. The community helps them. It's great. And so you can, there's some things that you can look at here too. How do you get started? There's lots of books and articles that I've linked here for you. Books, and then these are all teacher-friendly, accessible ones that you might want to just read in your free time over the summer. What's free time, right? And there's also, if you're not aware that the Rubicon, the MC3 curriculum is being updated as we speak by the Oakland ISD consultants. They have finished the 8th grade one and the 5th grade one, so they're much more inquiry based. They are now in the process of doing grades 3 and 4, and eventually we'll be updating all of this. And those are marvelous places to go for inquiry based, and they're aligned to the standards. And a great thing to do is be involved in professional learning. I know that next year, Oakland ISD is going to have a 4-part series of design labs again. And we've just had a marvelous time where you meet 4 times throughout the year, and there's some modeling and teaching in the morning, but you leave that day with an inquiry ready to teach in the classroom. You teach it, you come back for feedback. It's a great way to learn with others, because we have found that writing inquiries with other people is much more fun, and they usually wind up better. So getting started at the individual level, you want to start small. Maybe just do a focus inquiry. Don't, bite off more than you can chew. You got to start small. I forgot to show you what I'm looking at. And we want to search out existing inquiries. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. But the beauty of the C3 framework is you can take somebody else's work and make it your own to fit your context, your content, and your students. You can continue, there's an extra R in there, continuer, to build your own pedagogical knowledge, and then find your people. And then, like I said, we want to work more than at this infrastructure that is necessary so that this can be sustained at not just individual classrooms, but across our schools, so that we have quality curriculum and we can increase the quantity and quality of social studies for inquiry-based teaching and learning. That we want to provide good professional learning, and that we want to prioritize that this is a way of teaching comprehensive history. And so we, the people, we're working to create a more perfect union. And as John Dewey says, education is a social process. It's not preparation for life, but it is life itself. And so with that, I just really want to thank you for the time that you've given me. I love talking about this. So if you want individual support, or you want to, like, how can I get started? You can contact me. I love talking to teachers. I love helping write inquiries. And we also want to start working with the school and district support. I can't wait to see what's going to happen over the next few years as we build that infrastructure to support inquiry-based teaching and learning and get this around the state. So my contact information is there. You can reach out at any time. I don't think, Scott, we're going to have much time for questions, but I am at the end. So
yeah, no, it's perfect, actually. I think we have a few moments for a few questions, if that's okay, if you're available to take a few.
Should I stop sharing? Would that be the best?
Yeah, I think so. That might be great. And to let everybody know, we will be placing in resource links momentarily. So we appreciate your patience, and everything that Dr. Doornbos shared with us will be available through those links for you to access. We'll get that in the chat for you today, but don't worry too much if you miss it through the chat. We will be posting all of those access on our website, so that will be available for you down the road.